Good evening, everybody. I hope you're doing well. If you look at the compensation strategies of different companies, there are some similarities and there are some differences among them. So if we look at companies like Google or Nucor or Merrill Lynch even, they're all innovators in the industry. They all basically set standards for employee attraction, retention, or at least productivity, if nothing else. So these companies like Google, Nucor, Merrill Lynch have pay strategies that support their business strategies, pay strategies or compensation strategies that support their business strategies. For example, Google positions itself as a feisty startup company, and Nucor emphasizes productivity, they emphasize quality, they emphasize low cost, and then Merrill Lynch pay objectives are to get really top talent, to motivate them and to retain the top talent on an ongoing basis. So each of these companies are fairly clear about what is it that they actually want from the compensation strategy, how it should help the business strategy overall. Now, companies like Google, Microsoft, and even SaaS that Dario's used today, they tend to focus on different components of employees' compensation. In other words, different strategies are used within the same industry by different companies. So like Google, Microsoft offers very generous stock options, and their employees have actually opted for less pay compared to Google. However, Microsoft did scale back their stock awards. They replace it with cash, as you know, but their benefits continue to be sort of market leader to help them attract, retain top people. SaaS, which was mentioned in the discussion forum this week, they tend to focus on quality of work life compared to other companies that just focus on high base pay or cash. So these companies use different strategies in the same industry to target the same individuals that their competitors are after. And sometimes you can have different strategies within the same company. Different strategies within the same company in different units, depending on what market offers and depending on what your needs are. So sometimes units within the same corporations can face different competitive challenges in the market. They might adopt different strategies, and the strategies hopefully fit the unique needs of that specific unit or division within the company. So I think one of the examples that I've seen is SK Holdings, which have different business units, which can include gasoline, cell phone manufacturing, and even construction. So for different elements of their corporations, they use, again, different strategies. So the idea of letting the market decide strategy does not always work when you go outside of the United States. So in the US, we know the market a little bit better, perhaps because it's our home market, but when you're going abroad, Europe, Asia, or Africa, or Latin American nations, it might be very different. So strategic perspectives on compensation can be a little bit more complex than what it appears at the beginning. So when it comes to strategy, the idea is to have a fundamental direction that is an organization we all follow, and compensation should support that strategy. So at the corporate level, we might have the fundamental strategic choice of asking, what business should we be in? Usually you have to be fairly high up to ask that question, or you have to be the founding member or the owner of the corporation. However, at the business unit level, where many of us tend to serve, the choice shifts to the question of how do we actually gain, how do we actually sustain a competitive advantage in our business, in our industry. And then there's the functional level, a strategic choice, where the question is, how should the total compensation help this business gain and sustain a competitive advantage? So the strategic perspective tends to focus on the compensation choices, which can help your company gain as well as hopefully maintain that advantage over time. So I think if you're looking at this slide of strategic choices, you can see At the corporate level, what the question would be in terms of what business we're in, at the business unit level strategies, how do we win or gain competitive advantage in our businesses? And then the HR strategies, how should human resource help the corporation actually be a winner? And more specifically in this case, how can we use compensation and benefits to create that competitive advantage that hopefully is sustainable over time? And then when it comes to strategic compensation, we focus on the social, the competitive, and the regulatory environments to make sure we are within the law, make sure we're within the market in terms of what people expect, and at the meantime, gain a competitive advantage. So how should that total compensation help us win? And your compensation system is developed, you execute that hopefully effectively. At the meantime, the employee attitudes and behaviors are measured, assessed, and you adjust your compensation strategy on a regular basis in order to gain and maintain that competitive advantage. I think, Keisha, you mentioned earlier or sometime in this week's discussion forum that you can have an appraisal system, for example, with regards to good compensation. And when we're appraising or evaluating people, sometimes we do a really poor job of doing that. And we hold people's compensation back sometimes as a result of judgments that are not really objective. And that can obviously make the whole entire evaluation or assessment of performance a very negative experience for people. Idea is to support the business strategy, and the greater the alignment between the business strategy and the compensation system, the more effective the organization will be. In strategy, for example, we learned, should we be innovators? Should we be cost cutters? Should we have a focus strategy? Well, a supporting compensation strategy for an innovator places more emphasis on incentives that encourage innovations within the corporation or within the unit. And if you have a cost cutter strategy, it encourages productivity increases on a regular basis and will reward people accordingly. If you are a focus strategy on customers, well, here the whole idea is that we measure regularly the satisfaction of customers and we provide incentives for employees to continue delivering that. And I like the idea of the ammo theory by Boxall and Purcell. So that's where they talk about the idea of basically performance being a function of three different factors. In other words, ability, the motivation, and also the opportunity that we have at a given time. So compensation is key to attracting, to retaining, and to motivating employees, but you have to have the ability, you have to have the motivation, and you have to have the opportunity to perform effectively. Okay, it's a good model based on my perspective because it gives you a nice visual to remember ammo theory. In other words, providing fit between HR strategy and compensation strategy. So here you can see on the left side of the model, the back and forth between HR strategy and compensation strategy. And then horizontally and vertically, hopefully there's a fit between the HR strategy, compensation strategy, along with the business strategy execution, which provides hopefully increased revenue, lowering cost, and thereby we would define that as effectiveness. And that would mean competitive parity, competitive advantage, and stakeholder satisfaction. So in this case, a stakeholder could be your customers, it could be the employees, it could be another third party that is relevant to the compensation strategy. So I like this model because, again, the ability, motivation, opportunity is emphasized. And I think anytime we think about compensation, hopefully we think about, okay, how does it influence the ability of our employees to do their job? How does it help them to stay motivated to perform in terms of being cost effective or high performer or increasing market share or serving customers? And will it provide more opportunities if people are incentivized to do certain things? So again, if you go back to the idea of strategic compensation choices, think about alignment, think about competitiveness, think about the contributions of employees, and think about administration or management. How are those handled? So if we look at another example that is often talked about in compensation textbooks is Whole Foods. I work for Publix. I can relate to Whole Foods' overall objectives, which is to increase shareholder value, satisfy and even delight their customers, and seek employees who actually will help the company make money through cost effectiveness, through efficiency, through customer satisfaction, through whatever goals that they would have at a given time. So in terms of internal alignment, the store is organized into self-managed teams. Executive salaries are capped at 19 times that of the average employee's pay. And full-time employees actually qualify for stock options, which is the same for Publix, except at Publix, we didn't have a cap on executive compensation. But it's nice to see that they actually do that. At Publix, when I worked there, we did not offer part-time employees stock options, but full-time employees did have stock options. So it seems like in the industry, these two different competitors in the same industry are using similar strategies, or they're benchmarking from one another to some extent. In terms of external competitiveness, Whole Foods offers a unique total compensation strategy that is compared to their competitors, including Publix or Winn-Dixie or other retailers like Target or Walmart. And in terms of contributions of employees, they use a shared fate technique, and monthly performance affects team pay. So in other words, what I do impacts the rest of my teammates in terms of their pay. So that's kind of interesting that they do that. With regards to Publix, we did have similar incentives, but it only or mainly impacted management, not necessarily hourly employees or full-time and part-time employees. So the bonuses did impact management team within a specific store. If the entire store did well during a quarter, the entire management team got bonuses or compensation that was really a motivating factor for them. But it did not impact employees that were full-time or part-time, where in Whole Foods case, their employees are involved in that contribution or that element of pay. And in terms of the management aspect, it's kind of interesting because they use a no secrets management technique, which makes salaries known to all in you decide technique, allowing employees to choose their health insurance. So they're offering the cafeteria plan in terms of benefits, but in the meantime, the salaries are open book. Basically, it's open to everybody in terms of how much everybody's making in a given month or year or hourly. So that's very similar to the Florida State public school system, right? Where you can basically log into any university's website and discover how much the professors are making, where that is not the same with private or independent schools like NSU, where I don't know what my colleagues are making and they don't know what I make. So it's a different strategy, even though we're in the same industry education. There's also a discussion of stated versus unstated strategies. So it's kind of interesting that all companies have a compensation strategy. Some are explicitly shared with all employees, others are not. But nonetheless, if we see that managers are using compensation strategies strategically, even though they don't specifically identify and mention it, we know that they do have one. So the idea is to do so in a rational and a deliberate way, as long as possible, so you can continue to make improvements on it. There are some key steps in formulating a total compensation strategy that you should be aware of if you want to go about developing a strategy for your compensation in a methodical way. Step one is to assess the total compensation implications for your organization, for your unit, for your department. What would it mean? So the business strategy and competitive dynamics tend to interact with one another. We need to understand the business before we can design that compensation strategy. And in terms of HR strategy, are you using pay as a supporting player or perhaps as a catalyst for change? that is needed, that is demanded, that must happen in order for your company to survive or become a market leader. And keep in mind that a culture and values of the organization. So pay systems should mirror the reputation, in the values, in the culture of the organization as well. And we should note that the social and political context do affect compensation choices at any given time. So question number 2 would be, or step number 2 would be to map a total compensation strategy using the various elements of the pay model, such as the objectives, the internal alignment, the external competitiveness, the employee's contribution, and the administration or overall management. And then steps 3 and 4 would be to implement and to reassess, and for the purpose of continuous improvement, right? So we need to implement the strategy through the proper design and execution of the compensation system. If we don't do it properly, unfortunately, people suffer and they think about appraisal process, for example, with a negative mindset. They don't look forward to it in all cases. So we need to provide that training to managers how to implement the strategy properly, especially if appraisal systems are an important part of that. And then the last step would be reassess and realign in order to close the loop. So let me show you the model that I'm looking at here. You can see step 1, assess the total compensation implications for your specific business, right? So in this case, what is the business strategy and the competitive dynamics of the market, or your employees' views and their views regarding unions. All of that should before a compensation can be mapped out. So once you map it out, then you need to make sure that there are alignment, that the alignment with your overall company objectives or goals. Think about the competitiveness. Will it deliver what it's supposed to deliver? Are employees involved in terms of their contribution? Will they actually be motivated to continue performing at a high level based on this compensation system? And what is the role of the management? How are they reinforcing this? Are they trained for this? Are they prepared for this? Can they execute it properly? So again, once it's implemented and executed, then finally, you do make improvements. In other words, closing this loop. So making improvements based on what we learn in adjusting as appropriate to realign as conditions change and realign as strategy changes at the overall business level or corporate level. So what I want to do now is basically give you an exercise. So think about the sources of competitive advantage. How can we test those sources? So there are 3 tests that you can use. In other words, 3 questions you can ask. Is the compensation strategy aligned with our business needs? Is it aligned with the business strategy, with external conditions, and internally with the overall human resources strategy? So second question is, does it differentiate us? So how is the pay system managed to provide this differentiation? Each strategy should be woven into the company's overall strategy. So the question is, if we're doing that properly, does it really differentiate our system from other corporations' pay systems? And a third question to ask is, does it really add value? Does it add value? So in this case, we would actually be able to calculate the return on our investment. So can we say that once we change the compensation strategy, our return on investment is actually better compared to the prior years when we did not have this? So those are the 3 tests that I would like for you to actually align with an example. So what I want you to do is think of a company that uses compensation strategy as a source of competitive advantage that fits into one or more of those 3 questions that I asked. Is the compensation strategy aligned? Does it differentiate us? And does it actually add value? So I'll post those questions for you on the chat area. This way it reminds you of the 3 tests. At the meantime, come up with an example. So you can join one of the breakout rooms. So let's go with 2 breakout rooms. Okay, so I'll give you guys 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, assign a spokesperson who can give us one example. Okay, so which group would like to go first? Go ahead and tell us your example.
I guess I'm the spokesperson for group 2. We chose Target. They're one of the top retailers. They offer a lot of benefits to their employees. In 1975, they first offered 10% employee discount. And at that point, the first woman named for Dalton Hudson Corporation Board of Directors. And the reason why I know a lot of this is because in my last class, we had to do a research paper on Forbes top 100 businesses. And they are aligned with a lot of, dated back from the 1600s all the way to the present time. They've kept up with with everything that's been involved as far as LGBT, Black History Month that they celebrated back in 1992. They introduced Expect More, Pay Less. They've always had different slogans depending on the era. And they also support education for their employees. They offer them a tuition to go to school. And also they come up with different community service. They have arenas named after them. They've introduced in-store recycling. They support marriage equality. They have they had the first car seat trade-in program in 2016. They started when COVID hit in 2020. They reached out to their employees, increasing the minimum wage from 15 to 19, establishing REACH and $10 million. They come up with their own name brand for their clothing, and they offer a lot more. They have over thousands of stores nationwide. Let me see, what else? They became the Superstore Target in 1995. They've also introduced an employee emergency assistance fund. They sponsored the first arena sponsorship, the Target Center, and sponsored Kids Saving Earth acquisition, Marshall Field's sexual orientation reorganization. And they really have been keeping up with the era as we move forward each year. They're always coming up with new innovations to stay on top of their retail. And I think that's basically it. Did I leave out anything else?
Thank you so much. And I believe in South Florida here, at least, we're one of the first companies to go to $15 per hour for starting new employees.
They raised it after COVID.
But I was impressed that they went with $15 minimum.
And I think they also offer stock options to their employees.
Okay. Yeah, so these are good sources of competitive advantage, and hopefully it's sustainable. That's the whole idea of compensation strategy for long term. Well, thank you very much, Sharon. Any questions for Sharon or her team? Okay, if not, let's go with the second group. Who is our spokesperson for the second group?
Hi, that would be me, Melissa. So we went with Southwest Airlines. So obviously they're an airline carrier. And so we answered yes also. So Southwest prides itself on customer service. And they begin kind of trying to instill what they call the Southwest way when with the applicants. So they expose their applicants to the Southwest way from the beginning, so that when they become employees, they embody what that what the Southwest values are. And so for them, the warrior spirit, servant's heart, and fun-loving attitude. And I don't know how many of us have ever flown with Southwest, but I've seen constant videos on YouTube of, the flight attendants when they're making their, introductory announcements, and how, they're very fun and interactive with their customers. This year, again, in 2023, they're one of the best places to work. They offer across the board benefits in terms of similar to other companies, but they also offer a variety of perks related to travel. So whether it's, rental cars, the employees obviously travel for free, on standby, but still free. And then they do receive discounts for confirmed flights. I don't have a bunch of stats. That's what we have. So that's all.
Thank you, Melissa. Is Southwest Airlines pilots on strike right now or no? I thought I saw that on the news a few days ago.
I don't believe so.
They're not on strike, but they threatened strike. They're in like the beginning phases of negotiations, and from what I understand and read is that they're trying to go to negotiations to avoid a strike, based on all of the inconsistencies with their all the stuff that happened, when the flights were canceled.
Okay.
Yes, I was part of that.
Okay, so I'm glad you all mentioned that. No, I'm glad you all mentioned Southwest Airlines, because this is where the collective bargaining agreement comes in. So that's another element of compensation strategy. At least the unions can be another stakeholder in this regard. And I think both textbooks actually emphasize and mention that element as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about third parties or other parties being stakeholders, it goes beyond the organization and the employees, right? So, and unions would be one of those. So those are good points. Thank you, Sharon, Melissa, and Keisha.
And it's strange because the airline industry is one of those where most companies may have a union that's, for the company. With the airline, it's like you have the pilots union, you have the, flight attendants union, and then you have those who are on the ground in the airports, and, they don't always align. So.
True. All right. So any other comments for team number 2? Okay, those are good examples. So again, using basically the 3 questions: is the compensation strategy actually aligned with the business strategy? Does it really differentiate us? Does it make us different from everybody else? Whether it's Walmart, whether it's Target, whether it's Southwest, whether it's Whole Foods, or whether it's any organization, again, chances are they use compensation properly or strategically to add value, which is the 3rd question. Does it really add value to our organization overall? And for that, we would need data, obviously, to compare before and after, sort of like the control group that medical professionals do. So we would use the same strategies for compensation outcomes as well. So I guess what I want to mention is that compensation, again, as I mentioned last week, and benefits management should be rewarding and should be strategic. And we need to evaluate, police, and improve it on a regular basis, whether it's in terms of strategy, specifically, explicitly, or implicitly in terms of how it's executed on a day-to-day basis by management. So all of this requires work, all of it requires understanding, and all of it requires having that policy in place and constantly reminding management to work toward it as best as they can. See you all on the discussion forum. Good night, everybody.
Night.